Peter's given me 20 minutes to put you to sleep, so I'll try my best. The question is, why are we wasting 1/3 of our lives asleep? This is not just an idle question, but this is something that's both society and sometimes even our religious upbringing reinforces for us. Have you ever been asked the question by a high-priced consultant, what keeps you up at night? They're asking you that because they want to know what you're worried about. But in fact, that message is prevalent within all societies today. If I were a good manager, I would be awake at night trying to solve the problems. If I'm a good administrator, I would be wrestling with problems rather than being asleep. I'd like to suggest to you that that is not a good message any more than if the consultant had asked you, what do you want to go home and drink a pint of whiskey? We wouldn't ask that question these days, certainly not in this audience, but that's essentially what we're telling ourselves. It's okay not to sleep. And when we get into religious patterns of speech, don't we oftentimes associate sleep with not being energized, with not being full of fire? Don't we say you should wake up and do the work that God has set before you? Once again, I'd like to suggest that even though those are the analogies that we use, that we can get the idea that sleep itself is the problem. Sleep is not the problem. Sleep is a gift that God has given us. So let's talk about the reason why God is giving us sleep. There's lots of studies to back this up, but I'd like to suggest that these things listed on this slide are things that every one of us who's had a 2 or 3-year-old knows intuitively. If you've lived with a 2-year-old, you know that when he or she is sleepy, lots of bad things happen. And if you tell the child, honey, I think you need to take a nap, this child is very likely to say to you, I am not sleepy, and then promptly fall asleep and feel much better afterwards. I merely want to suggest to you that this is true of age 2, of age 22, of 42, and 62. It does not matter how old you are more likely to push send on a bad email that you will regret later when you don't have enough sleep. We all know the Bible story of the Hebrew worthies who were found 10 times wiser than anyone else in the kingdom. Here's a study that backs this up from McGill University. Dr. Gruber actually took normal Montreal school kids in about the 3rd grade and taught them and their families good sleep habits. And she found in her research that they only increased their sleep about 30 minutes per night on average, but that yet the teachers who were blinded to the intervention recognized these children who were part of the sleep study were less restless, less impulsive, and less emotionally labile. In fact, they actually improved their performance on testing. And I asked myself, how long did Dr. Gruber have to have her subjects sleep better to achieve this result? The answer was 5 days. 5 days of improved sleep creates improved behavior and improved functioning in school children. And once again, if you did this with 42-year-old managers, you would find the same thing happening. Now, we all know that there are intermediate benefits, and there are many mental health experts here at this conference who can do a much better job of explaining how sleep is involved with this. But certainly, sleep deprivation in the intermediate functions definitely causes problems. But what's new is that there are long-term results of sleep deprivation as well. Again, there are many experts who will tell us about the cardiovascular or the endocrinologic effects. I'm a neurologist, and I'd like to share with you one other reason why I think God is giving us sleep. This is Dr. Nidegard from University of Rochester, and she found in 2014 an amazing fact that none of us ever realized. When we are asleep, our brain cells actually change their shape slightly, and allow waste products from our neurons to actually be removed. Without this, the waste products tend to build up. One of the waste products that Dr. Niedergaard's group found that built up if you did not get good sleep was beta amyloid, one of the proteins associated with Alzheimer's disease. This is for the first time a clear indication of why our brains need to have restorative sleep. It helps our brain cells maintain their health. This is not proof that getting good sleep will prevent Alzheimer's disease, but there are more and more studies, including an interesting study from Framingham, Massachusetts, that do suggest people with bad sleep have a higher incidence of Alzheimer's disease and dementia 10 years later. So let's talk about what makes natural sleep good for us. First of all, how long should you sleep? You'll notice that this changes throughout our lifespan, and that in general, we can get by with less sleep as we get older. Everybody is different, so maybe that's not true of you, but this is in general. Furthermore, it's not how much time you're unconscious at bed at night. It is whether or not you're having natural sleep cycles that helps you feel good. We all know that if you drink too much alcohol, you're likely to sleep a long time. But when you wake up, it would be unexpected for somebody who did that to feel good. Instead, we know that they're going to feel hung over. They will feel groggy, dispirited, tired, fatigued. And that's because alcohol and a lot of other chemical substances that make us sleepy tend to retard the amount of natural sleep cycles we get. We tend to sleep in 90-minute sleep cycles with REM sleep or dream sleep toward the very end. This gentleman is Conrad Murray. He's not a Seventh-day Adventist, but he did do his internal medicine residency here in 1990 at Loma Linda, and then he went on to become a cardiologist. You may not know Dr. Murray, but you probably know his most famous patient, Michael Jackson. The problem with Mr. Jackson was, yes, he could go to sleep and be unconscious from the propofol, but he would not wake up feeling better because he was not getting the REM sleep that you need for restorative sleep. Instead, he woke up feeling worse, probably, and need to repeat this cycle. So just being asleep in bed does not mean that you are getting this help you need. You need to avoid many of the things that I have listed there. When to sleep is another question, and this once again depends on how old you are. You will notice that people tend to sleep earlier when they're younger, but at about age 18 to 30, the preference of people who are not being required by a schedule to have any particular time is to sleep later and later. And as you can tell here, that by the time you are a young adult, you tend to want to naturally go to sleep by 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, or maybe even 1 o'clock, and get up at 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning. So when we schedule a class in high school or college or university for 7 a.m., whose sleep schedule does that benefit? It turns out it's the professor, not the students, because as you get older, you tend to once again want to sleep earlier and earlier in the evening. So why are you sleepy if you are sleepy? There's a lot of different possibilities here. The most common one is too little sleep. You can certainly have a fragmented sleep, like a nursing mom. You can have disordered or circadian rhythm disturbances, like General Conference vice presidents who fly all over the world to keep everything going. All of those things can make you sleepy. Just as a reminder, most mood disorders tend to make you feel sleepy and disrupt sleep. It's one of the common questions we ask when we're screening people for mood disorders. But the opposite is true too. Lack of sleep, lack of positive sleep or natural sleep can make mood disorders worse. One sleep disorder that is a primary sleep disorder deserves attention simply because it's so common: obstructive sleep apnea. This is a condition characterized by loud snoring and then abrupt cessation of breathing in the middle of the snore. This is also a problem because the person suffering from this does not remember doing this. It is his or her sleep partner who says you are snoring loud, and the person suffering from obstructive sleep apnea would say, I don't remember any of that, you're making this up, you're exaggerating. The problems that are caused by obstructive sleep apnea include cardiovascular disease, glaucoma, and of course, very sleepy bed partners. So this is not something to be laughed at, because it turns out that in actuality, let me go back one step. This can actually shorten your life expectancy. Untreated obstructive sleep apnea can actually decrease your life expectancy by 4 or 5 years and wipe out all those positive findings that Dr. Frazier is finding in the Adventist Health Study 2 and all the other good things that we benefit from when we talk about at this conference. The problem when you're trying to convince people that they need sleep is that a layperson would even look at the statistics I just quoted and say, well, that's ridiculous. I don't know of anybody who has ever died of snoring. And let me just give you 2 examples of individuals who sleep apnea was part of their early demise. One is a Supreme Court justice by the name of Antonin Scalia. So most of us in the United States remember Justice Scalia, a very prominent member of the United States Supreme Court who died at a hunting lodge in Texas. What we don't oftentimes hear in the news is that Justice Scalia actually had a CPAP machine with him, but was not using it that particular time when he took the nap. So it is likely that Justice Scalia died earlier than he would have if he had had adequate treatment of his obstructive sleep apnea. Now, if you're in the rest of the world, most of your people who attend conferences or attend seminars on sleep won't know Justice Scalia, but they probably know the actress Carrie Fisher, who played Princess Leia on the Star Wars series. Many of you will know that Carrie Fisher had a very rough life with a lot of trouble with mood disorders and drugs, but she also, toward the end of her life, was displaying symptoms of sleep apnea, and in her actual death certificate, sleep apnea is mentioned as a contributing factor to her death at age 60. So sleep apnea is something that you need treatment for. You need to follow the treatment because that helps prolong life. Now let's talk about a subject called sleep hygiene. And every time I do this, whether it's with a patient or in a large group, I'm always worried because people are going to look at one of these suggestions and say, well, I do that all the time and I sleep perfectly well. If you are getting the sleep you need and are waking up well rested on your own, feeling good, then you don't have to follow any of these things. But if you have a patient or a client or somebody else who is complaining about that they have trouble getting the rest they need, here are some suggestions that you can use. And I would encourage you to go on the internet. There are many good publications that list all the different sleep hygiene rules. I particularly like one from Western Australia. The health authority there published a very nice monograph that's available online about sleep hygiene that can explain all the rules to you. But here's some of them. General health. And by the way, as we go through this, look and see if you don't see elements of the Seventh-day Adventist health message poking their head through all of these different things that help enhance sleep. Exercise daily, expose yourself to sunlight for a little while each day. That helps keep your circadian rhythm on track. Address any mood disorders. If you do take a nap, don't sleep more than on 1 90-minute sleep cycle. Some cultures accept this, and that's great. Others don't. Avoid drugs, especially close to time in the case of alcohol. Avoid most types of sleeping pills that are available. And also avoid large meals close to bedtime. If you're part of a culture that has a large meal close to bedtime and you're adjusted to it and it's not affecting your sleep, don't worry about that. Make bedrooms pleasant. You can look in the Spirit of Prophecy, and Ellen White actually comments about damp, cold bedrooms that she does not like, bedrooms that aren't ventilated, and all of those things affect your sleep. So having a quiet, darkened room, Most people prefer cool rooms. I have relatives who live next door to me. They are a couple. She prefers the temperature in the room to be about 80 degrees. He prefers it lower. One time their furnace failed and they were much cooler. She was complaining bitterly that she couldn't get any sleep because it was so cold. He woke up and said, "That's the best night's sleep I've had for decades." So a lot depends on what you're used to and what you like. Use the bedroom only for sleeping and sexual intimacy. Don't use it as a lounge. And especially if you're having trouble sleeping at night, that's an important rule to have, so that when you go to bed, your body knows that it's time to go to sleep. Listen to your circadian rhythm. Go to bed when you're tired. Wake up naturally if you can. Try and maintain a regular schedule. Don't try and change too much. If you are going to have a shift, try and plan for that shift. Never toss and turn in bed for longer than 20 minutes. Get up and relax. When you read sleep hygiene literature that's available to the public on the internet or from your friends at the General Conference Health Ministries Department, you'll see one of the things that they really hammer home to people is the need to have a regular pattern, habits of going to sleep. Follow a routine, follow a ritual. And one of the things that they will always say is try and set aside your worries. You'll see much exercises listed on sleep hygiene guidelines for what to do to help yourself not worry. So one of the things that is suggested to the public is resolve that you'll write down all your worries and then set that aside and wait until you get up in the next morning, and then you can deal with them. If you can sleep like General James Mattis over there, who is a figure in American political circles about a year ago, then you don't have to worry about it. They urge people to practice relaxation. They have many suggestions as to how to relax your muscles, how to think of things that you're thankful for and maybe write them down, to envision peaceful scenes in your mind. All of these rituals can help you go to sleep. If you're presenting this to the public, they will think, I understand, you're talking about meditation. You're talking about some new practice that could help me relax. But I'd like to suggest to you that that is not necessarily the implication. For people in this room and people who are faith-based, you can tell them there's a simpler way of having a restful, relaxing bedtime routine. Think of 3 things you're thankful for, and thank God for those 3 things. Set aside your problems, people are told. Why not turn them over to God? One of the times that I was having trouble sleeping at night was when my middle son was about 13, 14, 15 years old, and I was sure that he was going to end up being a mass murderer somewhere. Just very difficult to control person, prone to temper outbursts. And one night, I got really worried about this, and I finally said, God, you have to do something with Tim. I can't do anything with him. I've tried everything I know. You need to take over because this is not going well. And I had the very strong impression of God talking back to me saying, remember, I love your children even more than you do. Was that a relaxing thought? Peter wants me to say, Tim turned out fine. He's actually teaching history at one of our local academies right now, and it's a wonderful thing. And I shouldn't have been worried. I didn't need to worry. God really could handle my worries. And finally, when you contemplate things, contemplate God's wonderfulness. In essence, all those bedtime rituals we talk about are really what our parents taught us when we said our goodnight prayers by the bedside. So I would encourage you to just remember that God had a reason for giving us sleep. It's a wonderful gift. It is not something to be skimped on or disparaged. And try your best to have a relaxing night's sleep. I will guarantee you that you can feel better very rapidly with this, and that you'll also be a more effective leader and worker in God's vineyard. Thank you very much.